And I realized maybe my talk is a good link between the first panel and the second panel. So you're going to see, in the end, hopefully you're going to see why. So the title of my lecture is War Belongs in a Museum, but How? My name is Stephan Horn, and I work as an educator at the Military History Museum of the German Armed Forces, the Bundeswehr. The museum is financed from the budget of the Federal Ministry of Defense. And the museum has 3 locations, as you can see on the slide. It's Berlin-Gatow, which is a former airfield of the Wehrmacht, of the Nazi army, Dresden and Königstein. And I'm working at Berlin-Gatow, and we're focusing on the military, on the history of military aviation in Germany. Before I give you, ladies and gentlemen, an insight into the educational work of the history I'm working for, I would like to briefly point out which country I come from, as this is important in order to understand the cultural environment that has shaped my personal perception of war and the military. I was born in West Berlin during the Cold War. I come from a country that bears responsibility for 2 world wars, and in which, as far as I can see, pacifism has been a part of the political DNA since 1945, for this reason. Nowadays, some of conservative historians in Germany call this a structural pacifism in Germany. I can illustrate that with a comparison of museum logos. So let's take the logo of the Army Museum in Białystok. So it's a wonderful logo that immediately makes clear what it is about weapons and soldiers, okay? So let's take the logo of the museum I'm working for, which is more abstract. It shows a crack in the font and color and is intended to point out the ambivalence of the horror of war and fascination with technology. So this corresponds with the architecture of the main building of the museum in Dresden. You can see a large wedge by architect Daniel Liebeskind breaks with the aesthetics of the former arsenal of the Saxon army. This is what critics call structural pacifism, deconstructing the war. War belongs in the museum. Museum makers whose field of activity is the military museum can quickly agree on this motto. But what happens next? What approaches and goals guide the work of collecting, exhibiting, and educating? What should be preserved, presented, and communicated? How? And with what interest? Particularly in military history museums that deal with the polarizing topic of war, opinions are often divided. War is not at least a political issue because it raises questions about guilt and responsibility, about perpetration and victimhood. The essence of war is the human suffering it causes. Human suffering is politicized. When it comes to war, the practice of the museum often moves between legitimization and subversion, between identity factory and a critical place of learning. Memory research in recent decades has shown that the museum as an institution of cultural memory, is an interface between critical historiography and communicative memory, and is therefore almost inevitably destined to be an actor in debates on the politics of memory. In educational and mediation work at the Museum exhibition, private historical memories and interpretations often encounter those of official cultural memory, which, depending on the degree of openness of the education program, guided tours and workshops, can provide an opportunity for the democratic negotiation process of diverse memory practices for the and historical interpretations. In the educational culture of an open society, which is at best based on diversity, the following standards should apply to historical and political mediation work. First one, treating controversial subjects as controversial. Things that are controversially discussed in science, politics, and society must be also presented as controversial in educational work. Secondly, the prohibition against overwhelming. Participants must not be overwhelmed in the sense of desired opinions. I think this is crucial because talking about history, memories can always be very emotional. And if you're going to the field of emotion, sometimes it gets overwhelming. It should also be noted that a specific dilemma applies to the open society, according to which the liberal state lives from the conditions that it cannot guarantee itself. This great risk of freedom is also inherent in the culture of education and remembrance of the open society. So this is the theory I wanted to give you, okay? So if war belongs in a museum, how should war be represented and communicated there? My contribution would like to use the exhibition Bombenwetter, Air War and Language at the Military History Museum to explore the best practice potential of a linguistic historical approach in mediation and remembrance work on a war topic. So the exhibition was shown in 2021 at the museum in Berlin-Gatow. In German, Bombenwetter stands for a particularly good sunny weather. It's bombing weather. The exhibition dealt with 25 idioms and sayings that have their origins in the air war in the broadest sense. So terms such as blockbuster originate from military aviation. On the other hand, civilian terms have also found their way into the language of the military. For example, the original meaning of drone is a male bee. Dogfight refers to the close combat between enemy aircraft. According to our exhibition, the air war influenced the German language to an extent that many people are not aware of. Raising historical awareness, explaining the origins of various idioms and linking them to technical and military history topics was an extremely rewarding activity. As language is omnipresent, visitors to the museum immediately found points of reference for the content of the exhibition. Etymological aha experiences function like a kind of a reward system in the museum's educational work. The exhibition didactics were based on the classic guiding question of museum education. What does the topic have to do with the visitors in the here and now? The exhibition was intended to offer associative spaces in which the recipients feel comfortable with their own ideas and can select the content themselves. The exhibition had a modular structure, meaning that there was no chronology and no predetermined direction. There were at least 2 objects for each of the 25 idioms. Hands-on stations, which were developed by students of the University of the city of Oldenburg, were designed to invite the visitors to join in. So the keywords from museum education are therefore contemporary relevance, free choice learning, space-based and object-centered mediation, participation. So the exhibition concept pursued a libertarian approach, which is also derived from the theoretical understanding of the museum as a constructivist place of learning. No matter what the museum's intentions are and how they are implemented, visitors choose an approach based on personal criteria. So the constructivist exhibition remains open to different perspectives and interpretations that have to be worked out for themselves, and thus also distinguishes itself from the concepts that strive for immersiveness and predetermined master narratives. And as this is currently the trend not only in art exhibitions, examples would be the Museum of the Second World War or the European Solidarity Center in Gdansk, in Poland. So, in the following, I would like to discuss the potential of a linguistic historical education work in more detail. So, using a colloquial term from the air war, which found a previously unimagined spread during the Second World War. So, I'm talking about the term blockbuster. So you can see a blockbuster bomb over there. It's close to the text blockbuster, which is a huge bomb from World War II. Here are some other images of the exhibition. This is the main hall. It's about a vertical aircraft, vertical takeoff aircraft. But I'm going to talk about the blockbuster. The blockbuster is a linguistic relic from the time of Allied air raids on the German civilian population during World War II. In the winter of 1942, the British Air Ministry issued the Area Bombing Directive, a report on the accuracy of the Royal Air Force had revealed that previous bombing raids on Germany had been inefficient. The bomber crews mostly missed their targets for technical reasons. Area bombing, especially with incendiary bombs, was to bring about change. The Area Bombing Directive allowed the British Commander-in-Chief of the Royal Air Force Bomber Command, Arthur Harris, to use strategic bombers against civilians without restriction. This was intended to break the morale of the Germans and trigger riots against continuing the war. The first air raid under the new directive took place in the spring of 1942. The city of Lübeck, which is at the coast in northern parts of Germany, with its historic and therefore very fire-susceptible old town, was chosen. By the summer of 1943, the Royal Air Force had fully realized that it was easier to burn down a city than to rely solely on the effect of high explosive bombs. In order to create optimal conditions for the incendiary bombs. From a military point of view, blockbuster bombs, such as the HC-4000, were used. Their casing was small in relation to the amount of explosives. It produced few fragments, but an enormous pressure wave that covered roofs in a large radius, caused window panes to shatter, and thus opened the way for the incendiary bombs to ignite. So you can see the city of Hamburg, for instance, in 1945, and the buildings are still there somehow, but they burned down. So blockbusters were used to set off the roof, and then the incendiary bombs fell into the building, and they burned down. The Allies dropped around 68,000 HC-4000 bombs during the bombing campaign against Nazi Germany. The abbreviation HC stands for high capacity, the number for the weight of 4,000 English pounds, which corresponds to about 1,800 kilograms. The largest bomb used by the Royal Air Force in the Second World War, the HC-12,000, weighed 5.5 tons. While the British gave their bombs the name blockbuster, the Germans called these bombs, which were on average 3 meters long, Badeofen, boiler, or Litfaßsäule, advertising pillar. So nowadays, the here and now. Nowadays, blockbuster is used colloquially to describe a particularly successful film production or exhibition, but also an exceptionally high-selling pharmaceutical product, blockbuster. In this case, the air war is firmly anchored in everyday language, not only in Germany. However, it is unclear when the modern meaning of the word became established. Early evidence for the film industry attribution is a review of Cecil B. DeMille's film Samson and Delilah in the British newspaper, Daily Mirror, from 1950. The reviewer predicted the commercial success of a box office blockbuster for the film. In German-speaking countries, the term blockbuster only seems to have become established with the major film hits of the 90s, such as Jurassic Park and Titanic. So, with the dropping of 2 atomic bombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in August of 1945, the era of the conventional blockbuster ended in military history. A single bomb was now the ultimate blockbuster, capable of destroying almost an entire city and killing many of the people living there. I would like to come to an end, and I think this was quite a good example, blockbuster, that it is possible to talk about strategic and military issues by analyzing one word, and at the same time find a more civilian reference to the present. So, thank you very much for your attention.